Welcome to the Uplift, where we are uplifting our lives, uplifting each other, and uplifting our communities together. Thank you for joining myself, Cy Herrera, and Tessa Savala here, two women, two attorneys, doing it our way, and inviting you here each week to share in on the stories, advice, and life lessons we've picked up along our journeys that keep us uplifted, and that will hopefully do the very same thing for you. Now buckle in and let's get ready to be uplifted.
Hello, everyone. As always, I am Tessa, and I'm joined by the lovely and accomplished Cy.
Hi, Tessa. Welcome, everyone.
Hi. It's a lot going on this week, and who knows when we post this uh, episode. But I was thinking about Joe the FBI went in and raided former President Trump's. Well, I guess it's a home. I don't know. It looks like whatever it is. It's event center,
A
I guess.
residence of some
A
sort.
residence, yes. And the reactions to it have been, from the legal view, but then the political people are so just not nice about it and just not kind about it. And it made me think about wow, does everybody like is their lizard brain are all their lizard brains wired to this? I'm never going to be kind. Or do we have a culture where we still believe the nice guy finishes last? But then I think of all these people who are emerging in society, from and becoming very accomplished, and they're leading from this place of kindness. And it feels to me that that's the uplift, right? Like these people who are intentional and choosing to come from this place of kindness. There's this quote from Lizzo when she has her reality competition show, and it is, "We can be kind, and we don't have to pit people against each other." And then I think of Dan Levy, the creator of Schitt's Creek, who is known for always saying kindness always wins, and that there's an intention behind that kind of kindness. And that's what I want to see in this world. But I mean, how do we get there? And is it learned behavior, or is it something that's inside all of us? And it's easier to just be that lizard brain, right? Like, say you're in a group and it's easier just to blame people or be mean to people than it is to say, hey, let's just move forward and be kind to each other about it and help each other all out.
You know what's so interesting to me is I see so many points in what you just said, but the last thing that you said and whether or not it's easier to be kinder or mean, I think that's so interesting because I've always found it, hard not to be nice.
Right?
So, and I know that that's stooped in who I am. I'm a woman raised, as a girl in this society. I'm a, person of color, all these, with the background of being Mexican American, in a predominantly white area, all different reasons why that might be the case. But also interesting to me still that I think a lot of people have that same experience as me where you're taught to be nice, like that is the goal, right, is to teach kids to be nice, and especially girls and women are supposed to be nice
Mm-hmm.
almost to the point of subservience at times, that we've talked about that, of course, but I think it's really interesting that in a group dynamic, maybe things change. I think that there is definitely a little bit of protection in the group where you might get a little bit of what do they call it? Like a almost, well, I mean, you sometimes can find ways to dehumanize the other group, of course, but there's also like an anonymity, right, when you're in a group versus like a one-on-one type of situation. And so I think that there is some, pack mentality stuff that happens for sure.
Oh, like we all turned into Lord of the Flies.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And it can totally happen, and it can happen in, small ways and big ways and in different settings that you might not expect. I mean, all you got to do is say Mean Girls. You know what I mean? Like there's so many examples where you could just be like, "Oh yeah, I guess, when I'm with friends and people are being snarky, then it gives me permission to be snarky or gossipy or anything, whatever. Like, I mean, it just is. There is something, just uniquely human where um kind of getting our social cues from other people, it can guide us and give us that I guess permission to be different or to say to be negative, to go to that negative place. And I mean, maybe
Yeah.
it's the same thing with even like kindness. It's like, those social norms are big.
Do you think that it's almost as though that mob mentality of a group gives us permission to either like put our integrity second, which I
Mm,
like to think that if we're choosing to be kind, that's who we are,
right.
and we sacrifice who we are, and that's our integrity by
Mm.
choosing to enter this kind of mob mentality. And do we shed our integrity when we get into a group setting?
Well, I think here's what I really my whole take on the group dynamic is that when you're an individual, and that's why I think just generally self-reflection is really important. Like, to know thyself has always been a thing that, I always put first, because, when you get into a group, that dynamic can kind of overcome you. And so generally what I think is you want to have your values, that you've identified on your own and separate against from the group. But when you get into a group, I think what really happens is that there's a lot of overarching, kind of very human basic instinct stuff that can take place, that's based in these very simple, very strong and powerful emotions. And I think one of them is definitely fear. Right? Like, sometimes people are coming together in a group because they're fearful, right? Like,
Right.
why do we have cliques? Because nobody
Yeah.
wants to be a loner. Nobody wants to have no friends, so you have to get in with a clique, maybe. I mean, that's just a very basic thing, but I mean, we can all relate to that because,
Yeah.
we've all seen it and we've all had to navigate it, right? And it's real, even in a social setting, literally just for social capital and just social experience, not even big high stakes beyond that. And so I think that's a big part of it. It's that, if the group has a fear, just generally, I think fear is one of the biggest, motivating factors of a group to do certain things. And, we can encourage kindness and, acceptance and optimism in a group where we feel secure. And I think that that's a big part of it, because when people feel insecure, they feel scared, they feel
Yep.
fearful, I think that's when the worst stuff comes out, especially in group settings.
Yeah, this made me think of like growing up, and it was, I mean, I'd like to think they did their best, but it was complicated, let's
Mm,
say. And when it came to accepting, like in difficult situations, when things didn't go what my parents thought was their way, it was a blame game, as opposed to how do we actually come
mhm.
from a place of kindness and solve the situation that's really at hand and not just start blaming people. And
Yep.
I think that doesn't change, right? Like I remember being in a business meeting a couple weeks ago and it was just a blame game. I'm like, wow, this is like kindergarten, right? Like think
Totally.
of think of all the time that was wasted. I mean, I was thinking about the time that was wasted as I
Right.
sat in this like 3 hour meeting wondering, wait, so we just wasted 3 hours while 10 of you blamed a bunch of people when we could
Right.
have just been planning on how do we solve this problem.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I relate to that so deeply because I'm a very pragmatic person. I'm solutions based, and I've been using that language with people a lot lately because, feelings are important, sure. Like, emotions are important, relationships are important generally, um, in all different settings. But at the same time, um, I don't see the point of just
I
blaming
don't
people.
either.
And I mean, like, I feel like I feel like maybe there's just like a different time and place, but it's definitely, people they do need that to get over it and to get to the solutions. I guess, like, there's certain people that just want to get to the solution a lot quicker and bypass all of that other stuff. But, it is important for people. I think it can be important for mental and emotional health. And I think, again, it's about knowing yourself and what is important. And but like I tell my sister, in the workplace, um, you don't necessarily want to make these people your friends that you process all your stuff onto, right? It's like there
Right.
should be a place and a time for everything.
Yeah.
And I think that that kind of boundary setting and intentionality and where we do our work and what work we do where, I think that is probably a key thing that is missing for a lot of environments, right? Like people I mean, everything just spills over into everything, and it's frankly just not productive. And maybe being productive is not the only thing, but I do think that it's honestly healthier to have some separation. That's just my personal take on it. I think that you got to have some separation. If you're processing everything that you're going through in one place with the same people that you have problems with, or even that if you don't have problems with it, but they're just too close to it and they maybe aren't empathetic and they have their own agendas or their own thoughts of what should happen. I just don't think that that's the healthiest method, right? Like maybe you need to
Right.
go do your work somewhere else, like get a friend, get a therapist, get whatever you need to do, go work it out in a way that brings you, some joy or processing or healing. Like all of those different things can lend to you being a better, stronger, more powerful, effective person in these other settings where you can actually focus on solutions and not ignore those other feelings but maybe process them in a way that's most healthy for you.
So as like the pragmatic people at the table and the people who want to be intentional about kindness and solving problems so that they don't intentionally punish people and it's moving forward in a way that's kindness for everybody. How do you think it's best to handle those people who are just like, I want to blame this person and I want to keep
Mm,
blaming this person and I don't want to, or I want to find a solution, but it's a solution that isolates and doesn't move the group forward.
mm,
I mean, and I think
yeah,
sometimes those lizard brain ideas that are like very instinctual and very human can win in a group setting
yep.
if we if the people who are, the practical kind people don't voice their opinion. And I will admit sometimes I'm like, I don't want to voice my opinion because I don't want to spend 2 hours trying to convince these people. Right? Like maybe
Yeah.
that's me just giving up. My lizard brain's like, I'm out.
I'm tired, goodbye, let's go to sleep.
Yeah.
And and that's real too. I think it's a really difficult question that I don't have a simple answer to, and if anyone else has a simple answer, please send it to me, because I will use it in my daily life.
Me too,
But
please.
but I think we could explore some opportunities, and maybe experiment with some of these things, like, I love when we come up with new practices that we can try in our lives because that's all in my mind, that's all you can do is,
Right.
make I'm almost like a little scientist in my life where I'm like, let's make a new theory or theorem and like let's test it out and
Yes.
see what happens. Let's report
Hey,
back and then try
how are
again.
you? The how are you?
Yes.
I'm fine
Yep.
theorem has been fantastic in this world for me.
Me too. It has been so meaningful, and I think it's kind of funny because I'm totally invoking, my doctor friend that I used to have, and not as much as she is. I don't give as much of a pause as she did, but I take a moment and I really let people know like how I'm feeling, and I think it just humanizes me, which I really didn't know, but apparently I'm very intimidating. And there have been, different times recently where people have, like, expressed that, when they first meet me or first find out what I do and who I am or what have you, like, they're just very, I guess, intimidated or just, just a little bit, like, worried about, how personable I might be or what have you, and which I just, I always just think is ridiculous because I'm like, I'm, the most down to earth person in my mind. So I'm like, I don't see where people get that, um, but it has a lot to do with, of course, how you present and how you approach people, and just taking the time to tell people how you're really feeling, and especially if you throw a little vulnerability in there and let people
Yeah,
know, like, I'm not having the best day. I am maybe having a little bit of a challenge right now. I'm a little, sleepy. I'm struggling with getting all the sleep I need or whatever. Like, just making yourself a human being is a
yeah,
good place to start. And actually, I don't know how we got to that, but it's actually a really good piece, I think, that we can infuse into our group dynamic stuff, because one of the things that people do in a group when they have fear, when they maybe have anger, when they have resentment, or just, I think, again, it really comes down to fear. People will find, a scapegoat.
mhm,
They will find I like to say, like, oh, people want heads to roll. People are looking for someone to blame, someone to center their fears and angers on, so that they can feel good about having like a release or relief there. And I think humanization is a huge key. I don't know how much it fits in or how it looks, but if you can find a way to humanize each other, I think it changes the dynamic, especially for forced groups, right? Like groups that are not like organically coming together
yeah,
for some shared like passion or whatever, but like especially like, a work group or family group, or anything where you're just having to work with other people or interact with other people, who could quickly, like, dismiss you as that or this, or she's just whatever, like, that is so common. And it really sucks, basically, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and like, none of us would want somebody to just write us off as some like cold-hearted person, or just somebody who
right,
doesn't get it, or just somebody who's you know I don't know, bitter or mean, or just like not worthy of being considered a human being and being considered, uh, being empathized with, right? Like, I think the key is everybody deserves empathy, and everyone is a human being. How do we humanize each other to remember that?
and I like to think that everybody wants to be thought of as a good person who's
Mhm.
doing good things to make the world better, right?
Yep.
Like, I'm sure there's examples that are not that, but at the heart of it, I think everybody wants to be a good person. And listening to what you said, Si, made me think maybe it's a two-step process in a group setting. Maybe it's first you have to like have that pause at the beginning of a meeting and ask everybody how they are and lead with an example that shows your vulnerability, right? Like, so even if you're the leader of the meeting, say, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. My brain might not be functioning at its highest and best level, but I'm here. I want to solve this problem, but please be patient with me if my temper is short because I just didn't sleep well. And it's not y'all, it's me.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then maybe it is like, and if you get everybody in the group to like have that moment to release some vulnerability, however small or however great. Maybe you've stepped up to a plate where everybody at that table is now human. And then as you're working through whatever discussions the group needs to work through, maybe when you stumble upon solutions or even during the middle of the meeting, just check in and say, like, how is everybody feeling about this? Are we headed in the right direction? Are we not? Are you comfortable with this? Are you not?
One thing we did at I was part of Leadership Austin, and an exercise we did that was really interesting for this, I'm just remembering, is they asked us what our greatest fear is. How you can't get more vulnerable than that, right?
Yeah.
So- and just talking about like how fear is often at the heart of so many, like, you know, impulsive, misguided sometimes, group, tendencies and actions. They did that, and it was really good. And like, I still remember some of the like exact, examples. And what happened is that we did it anonymously. So everybody basically just wrote down their fear about this group specifically. What is the biggest fear about this group? I think I might use this. This was really good, and we put it all, in a hat, and everyone just pulled one, and we went around the circle, and somebody read one that was not their own. And
Very cool.
and yeah, and then they asked each person reading to basically address it in some way, address that fear. And that was interesting too, because I mean, I did not know what to expect. Like some people had some really gnarly, deep, heavy type of fears. Like, I mean, this was, at a time when there were um, prominent school shootings that had just made the news. I think maybe one that had happened in Texas at the time. It was just very close to home and it was on a lot of people's minds. And so several people, talked about that being their greatest fear of just, mass shootings, especially against children. And, I was looking at the person that got that the first time and I was like, what are you going to say to that? Like, that is what can you say to that? Like that is I don't know what I would have said, but this person just was so, somehow just so elegant and like, rose to this occasion and so human and just like really compassionate and, just going right there with that person without even knowing who that person was, but knowing that they were in that circle and just sharing in that fear and like holding that space with them and holding that all those emotions that flood in with that and some people were just brilliant and being able to I don't know kind of address the fears that people had and others were just like I feel you and that was enough and it was something good. I think it was something good.
That's awesome. And I think it's such what you pointed out earlier of that vulnerable state kind of almost heightens our ability to be intentional about our actions. And when you're coming from a place where you want to lead with kindness and help other people become their highest and best selves and uplift those around you, having that kind of clear space of having moved aside your fears and your vulnerabilities so that you can lead with that intention,
Mm,
so important. And so important in a group setting too, right? To like
mhm.
know yourself that well that you're willing to, if that question comes up, how are you feeling about the solution? And you're like, yeah, this is not a great move. Because it's not easy to be that person who points out the flaws in a situation,
Right, right, right.
especially in a
Yeah.
group situation where it's a lot of I tend to think a lot of mob mentality in a group situation.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of just social norms that get, put in place sometimes early on, sometimes
Mhm.
from the external in. It's just like, a little microcosm of greater societal norms. Um, but really, yeah, I think that it's really difficult to get to the that space of vulnerability and honesty in a way that's assertive and productive, right, for each other and like an opportunity versus a shutting down, an isolating, a dismissing, an ostracizing. Like there's like two sides to this coin because I think at the end of the day, what we're really talking about is that there's conflict. There's
Mhm.
conflict in group settings. There's conflict. Maybe it's the group versus the world. There's this conflict, and you have to figure out a way to resolve it. And you either can resolve it. I always think in very simplistic terms when it comes to relationships in a healthy way or an unhealthy way. That's to me
Yes.
all it comes down to, right? And so finding the tools to really do things in a healthy way and keep your group dynamic really healthy, I think is key. But just having that intention is probably the biggest thing in my mind that you can do because again with leadership Austin, another thing that we did was in the very beginning we actually created group values. We created them and then we voted on them and then we assigned an agreement that we were all going to abide by these these values and these guidelines that we set for one another. And I mean, it was just basic things.
Wow.
Yeah. It was very intentional. And I mean, it's just basic things like, we will we will ask permission before we give advice, and I appreciated that because I'm used to people just giving me lots of unsolicited advice. So this is why this is why this one stuck
Unsolicited
out to
advice
me.
is the worst.
Unsolicited, unwelcomed, unwanted, and unnecessary. Thank you. No, thank you. So I was
Yeah.
like, I love these little, like, I love. I mean, I don't know if I made that one up. I might have, but I love that everybody seen what other people value and recognized it and not just acknowledged it, but also agreed to try their best to abide by these values and really boundaries, really. That's really what they were. We didn't call them that, but in my mind, you're basically setting some boundaries up where you're saying, this is, acceptable behavior, this is unacceptable behavior, and we're all grown adult human beings. Like, we are going to consciously choose, to abide by by these boundaries that the group has set for itself. And so I'm thinking more and more that, there are real ways to be intentional in a group setting. It's a matter of how far do you really want to go with it and how much do you want to articulate, because the truth is, in every group setting, the culture formulates, right? It forms regardless of whether or not you're intentional about it. There will be a culture that falls out of it. And it's a matter of whether or not you created that with intention or without intention. And, I think that the former is going to get you better results, of course.
It's funny you say that. I was reading this article this week about how middle, how diversity and equality and inclusion programs in business settings stall out at mid-management. And so
Mm,
you see very few people who are women or people of color
mm-hmm.
or members of the LGBTQ community excel beyond the mid-management because from the top down, that culture doesn't just
It
follow
doesn't
up, right?
permeate.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Doesn't
And
trickle
because
down.
it does not trickle down, because I like
You
to think
don't
we've all
say.
realized trickle down does not actually work.
Exactly.
But the
I hope
crazy
so.
part is, as these business people also see, you make more money when your top leadership is diverse because you
Mhm,
have diverse ideas and you don't have this kind of like, yes, sir, follow the leader
mhm.
kind of mentality. And even
Right.
if your leader is fantastic, we all make mistakes. And it's a
Mhm.
matter of how do you get a group that can control for those mistakes because they're willing to see the best for the group. And it makes you
Yeah.
realize if you have if you are part of the decision maker to form these groups, like think about the diversity of like opinions and the diversity of people in the room and their socioeconomic backgrounds and the places they came from and the languages they speak. And you want a group that's just different because we all see the world differently based on those experiences. And I think that's really when the best decisions are made. And granted, we all aren't in that position where we can form the groups, but at some point in time, we will be.
Yeah, and also you have to recognize your position as, a gatekeeper. You might not be, the head of your organization. That doesn't mean that you
Right.
don't have any power in the way that that group formulates. Like, for example,
Yeah.
we're hiring right now, right? And it's like, well, we could have just said we're going to hire whoever we want as, the leaders of this organization or what have you. But, I always go to the networks and the staff being the first network that we can tap into to say, who do you know? Who would be great? Who would be a wonderful, fit for our team? They don't, and no one knows your team better than your team itself. So, so they should know who would do well and who wouldn't, and who would be a great addition. And so, I mean, just that. I mean, just that. It's like literally like you do have some power. Even if you don't realize it, you just having a robust network and having people on tap, and again surrounding yourself with people that are positive and optimistic and kind and maybe mission focused, if that makes sense, or whatever it is that you think you value in another person, especially in this case a colleague. just having a robust network of people like that can be key actually for when the time is right.
And it's I think what you point out, that intent of knowing to go and ask those people, right? Because it would be so much
Mhm.
easier just to, like, deal with the stack of papers in front of you
Yep.
from a
Yep.
job listing, but it's so much more meaningful, and I like to think better for the organization and everybody involved individually too, when you act with that intent and check in with everybody on who might be the best person. And it could be that some people don't want to work with their friends. I
Sure.
totally get it.
Yep.
I
Yep.
have an
Things
uncle
can
who
get
refused.
complicated.
Yes, I have an uncle who refused to have a hand his business that was very successful over to his son or daughter because he didn't want to mess up their relationship.
Interesting.
And granted, they were in Sweden, so I think that mentality is probably easier to handle than it would be here. Because here it'd be like, "Oh, no, family first."
Yeah,
And I get it,
maybe.
right?
Yeah. No, I
But
mean,
he was
it's
very
really smart because people fall into that snake pit all the time.
right? Like, I would the idea of me being in a family business with my brother or my parents, no. I have a hard, hard no on
That's
that.
a hard no, yeah. Okay. And
Yes.
again, it depends, right? It depends. It really depends on the dynamic, and you have to, again, know yourself and know the people around you. You have to know how it works. And but honestly, business, I'm just gonna say, is tricky because you never know how it's going to go in business. Like you might have a great relationship
Yeah.
even with a friend, like you might just have like a great relationship in your social life or even, even in other ways, whatever. But maybe when you get into that kind of setting and all of the power dynamics that go along with that, or all of the decisions that need to be made, or whatever your work styles are, whatever, if there's a mismatch, then it gets really hard because then your friends and or family and the boundary thing is the issue, right? Because
Yeah.
the boundaries are different between like colleagues and family members or friends, right? And that's where it gets tricky. And so you're just, you're adding a lot to that.
So this is a question, and it's just more of my curiosity.
Mhm.
I have always been somebody who's like, if I'm working in a group in a setting, I think of the people that I work with as my colleagues.
Mhm.
And maybe some friends might emerge, but it's colleagues first. Like, I don't want to
Yeah.
get into their personal lives,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I don't think that's necessarily common. Like, what do you think? Is it friend first or colleague first when you're working
Well, I think
in a
it
group
has to be.
dynamic?
I mean, it has to be colleague first, right? Because I mean, you're all there for a reason. And for me, it's nonprofit work, and so it's very like mission heavy. It
Yeah.
should be mission centric. It should be mission focused. And so for me, it's like even lately, I've been reminding people and just using the language more to remind people like not to be patronizing, like, everybody knows why we're there, but to just remind ourselves and center ourselves really about, this is really about the community. This is about serving the community. This is about our patient. This is about our client. Like, you know, just putting everything in perspective is important. And so I always say colleague first. I think that friendships just happen, in work settings just by nature of like being around people that much, you know, that much a part of your life or that much time in your day or your week. But I also feel like uh, everybody has a different purpose too, right? So like I hate to admit this, but it's it's easy to be friends with somebody and have a work friend when you're at work and you have this a lot of time. There's been so many people that I loved, I really truly loved and still do love. And I just spent so much more time with them when I was at work, obviously. And we shared an office or we shared, the space or we got to go to lunch together every day or whatever, where it was like built in, you know. And and they're totally my colleague, but some of them really were my friends. I feel more guilty about like not maintaining full relationships with them outside of work because once I leave that space and I don't get that time with them that's just built in, it's just becomes more difficult. It's harder to find, the time. It's harder to, I mean, even if you hang out every week, it wouldn't be the same as much time as you spent together at work. And so that can be more difficult for me. But I mean, there's so much in that question, Tessa, because it becomes like, are you colleagues where you have the same kind of job? Is
Yeah.
there a power dynamic where one person is the boss technically? How friendly do you want to get with your direct reports? Or how
Right. It's
personal do you want that relationship to get? Because what if you have to make a hard decision about them? It can get really complicated really quickly. So I always say yes, colleagues first. And depending on the structure, depending on my role in the organization and their role in organization, I think that really actually, unfortunately, in my opinion, it really does, kind of define some borders of how deep that friendship can go, actually, because I mean, bar all of the actual rules, um, it can be unhealthy for you to have a really close personal relationship with somebody who, reports to you, for example. And then
yeah.
it can be really difficult when, evaluation time comes around or something like that.
That I think you make a great point about like there's this group of friends that are work friends, and then
Hmm.
there's like life friends, and then
Yeah.
there's childhood friends, right? Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's not as cut and dry as people think it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does, and I mean, you can have value for all of those people, right?
Oh,
You can,
absolutely.
and and they might be different and it might not be a time thing. Like one of my best friends in the world, sometimes we go, months without talking. And
Yep.
then we just pick up and have like a 3-hour conversation as if we've been talking every day. Like, I mean, we're just, there's a closeness that is undeniable. And, she's in a whole different city. And
Hmm.
like I said, we'll take long breaks in between, and then we'll have little spells of, we're talking every day or texting every day. And then, there will be a break, and that's okay. Like, we just pick up where we left off. And there are other people, it's like, if you don't have a reason to see them, then maybe you never make the effort, or maybe it becomes impossible even to make the effort. But it doesn't mean that you
Yeah.
don't love them or value them, or that you can't, have fun when you're together, or have a
Yeah.
phone conversation once in a while, or that you can't, be with each other every day. I mean, you can do, anything that feels good when it feels good. Um, but I think the tragic thing is like when there's a mismatch. So there's been times where I had really close friends and, would lose contact for a while. And I thought like, oh, we'll just pick up. We're so close, and then that didn't happen. That made me sad. Like, and I'm like,
Aw.
that sucks because I want that, but it's not there for them. And that's okay too. It's just then you have to just, celebrate what you had or when you had it. But that to me is really the only tricky thing is, if you really value people, want to keep them in their lives, you might even talk about it. I don't know. You might talk about it. And people honestly might not even know what they need or want out of a friendship. But again, having intentionality is I think key in all of these relationships, whether they be, individual, whether they be group dynamic. I mean, communication and intentionality are probably two really key things there.
I think you've summed up our entire conversation really well. That as long as we start from a place of intent and we set the values for ourselves and set values for the group, it should be a situation and the right setting to allow individuals to be uplifted and to allow the group to be uplifted as well.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and, you
I'm
know,
not saying
I
it's going to be easy.
it's not gonna be easy, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say the process could feel difficult or overwhelming or intimidating, um, but what I like to do with a lot of things in my life is put it to other people and feel it out on, where they are, because so often I feel like in society we're this, especially this individualism thing, this whole individual responsibility thing, it and this competitive nature of this country especially is it makes you feel as if you have to have all the answers. And it makes you feel as if like you need to be the star. You know what I mean? Like really, like everything is centered around like, can you be the best? Can you be the
Yeah.
one that knows everything? Can you be the one who, is the hero? Like, and I really think that gets internalized to a point where it kind of kills collaboration and it also breeds competitive, nature or dynamic in a group. And so I think there's a couple different keys here and we hit on a couple of them through this conversation. One of them is vulnerability and really being humble and admitting maybe that you don't know everything and that you need help or even just inviting other people to be part of this collaborative process. So it might seem like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get this whole group to be an incredible group and work well together? I feel like a lot of us have had to face those issues, especially like you were saying earlier, even just having to take on maybe like a middle management role or just anytime when you're for the first time maybe managing people or you're taking a lead on a project even or there's a school project that there's a group dynamic to it or what have you. You might feel pressure to lead the group. That's another thing, like people are obsessed with leaders and leadership.
And, and, and yet, look around in the United States and what do we see? Most of
Yes.
our leaders fall into one specific
Yes.
descriptor.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I'm saying is like just the like we really have to be reflective about why we fall into these kind of habits, I guess, and defaults when it comes to groups where everyone's looking for a leader and then people, certain people feel like they need to lead, right? And that they need to be the one maybe speaking the most, doing the most, directing other people, winning with ideas. That's another thing where it's like whose idea is gonna win type of thing versus
It's so funny you say
uh
that because I think of the people who like need to and have to be the leader are the
mhm.
worst
Yeah,
leaders.
absolutely. I'm always like, can I take like one step removed? Like I love like, working with people and maybe advising them to the point of like it's really a collaboration. Like I basically
Yeah,
have a bunch of ideas and I don't know if they're all good or all bad or some of them are good and some of them are bad. Like that's why I love to collaborate because I'm assuming that other people have the same experience where like you have ideas and you haven't had the chance to maybe, flesh them out. And that's what a group is so wonderful for. Like, I love a group, and I always say in partnership, all things are possible because I really believe that. I believe, I have some good ideas, I have some bad ideas, I have some skills, I have some gaps, and when you partner with other people, um, you could really complete all of that, right? You can like really like close
absolutely.
that circle and it's just I think there's so much power there and that's why it's so important and that's why I'm glad we're talking about it. I think it's, it's really an important topic to just to focus on and have intention around because there are always going to be groups first of all, just generally. But second of all, the power of groups, right? And how you can
Yeah.
harness them and how you can make the most out of them. And there's probably a million books on this and we should read them. But this is why this community is important. Like again, this is a partnership of community. We can come together and share all of our knowledge and wisdom to lift each other up and to lift our communities up and to lift up, all of us as a whole by doing that. And so um I would just start with, challenging the way that things have been done. That might be the first, step is that usually people get into groups and what do? Somebody makes an agenda
Hmm.
for the meeting, right? And who gets to decide what the agenda is? And then you have to stay to that agenda. there might not be space for other things. Might not be room for exploration. There might not be room for vulnerability. There might only be room for a presentation where people know all the answers and it's very, it's already buttoned down and tied up with a bow type of thing. Get creative. I would just challenge everyone to get creative, to think outside the box, to invite everyone into the process. So that way it's not just your responsibility. It's not anyone's individual responsibility. It's the responsibility of the group to set the intention and to abide by those intentions.
And as the forwarder, I will say, if the answer to why are we doing it this way is because that's how it's always been done,
Mm.
you need to stop and find a new route.
100%. Yeah, because the old ways were not centered in kindness. Let's just start there.
Yes. So start over, start with
Mhm.
kindness and be
Mhm.
intentional about it. Add in
Yeah.
a dash of vulnerability and
Mm.
collaborate, and it's gonna turn out okay.
Yeah, I love that recipe.
Thanks. Clearly, I'm trying to figure out what I should be making for brunch today.
Me too.
On that note, thank you all for joining us and laughing with us as we worked our way through how you figure out how to start a group or enter a group and allow intent to come into play, allow kindness to come into play, allow vulnerability to come into play, just to reach the greater good. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, Cy, for always being here with me.
Thank you, Tessa.